You're such a fucking prude, Matt. Jessica said it casually, twirling her wine glass between her fingers like we weren't in the middle of an argument. I leaned against the counter, watching her with narrowed eyes. Yeah? Maybe I just don't like the idea of my wife screwing random guys at some club. She rolled her eyes. It's not like that. It's fun. Everyone there's married, too. You'd know that if you ever came with me. I scoffed. Right? Because nothing says healthy marriage like watching you get railed by strangers. Jessica laughed, and I hated how easily she brushed me off. Relax, she said, sipping her wine. It's just sex, Matt. You're overthinking it. I'm not overthinking it, I snapped. You promised we'd do this together, or not at all. Jessica shrugged, setting her glass down with a soft clink. Well, you keep saying no. What am I supposed to do? Stay home and waste away? I clenched my fists. You could, I don't know, respect the fact that I'm not into fucking strangers? Oh my God. She laughed again, the sound dripping with condescension. You're so dramatic. I stared at her, my pulse thudding in my ears. How long, Jess? I asked, voice low. She raised an eyebrow. How long what? How long have you been going without me? Jessica paused for a second too long. I don't know. A few months? A few months. I gripped the edge of the counter, forcing myself to stay calm. You said you just started, I growled. Jessica smirked, swirling the last bit of wine in her glass. I said I started bringing it up recently. Doesn't mean I haven't been going. Her eyes locked with mine, daring me to push further. I stepped closer. Who? She blinked. What? Who's the guy? Or guys? Jessica tilted her head, the smirk never leaving her lips. Why does it matter? Answer the question. She set the glass down with a deliberate slowness, leaning in until her face was inches from mine. If you really want to know, she whispered, you could always come with me Friday night. I clenched my jaw, glaring at her. Jessica ran her fingers down my chest, trailing lower until they rested just above my belt. Think about it, she said softly. Then she walked away, leaving me standing there like an idiot. Friday night came faster than I expected. Jessica was already dressed when I walked into the bedroom. Tight black dress, heels that made her legs look longer than they already were. Her makeup was perfect, hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked fucking incredible, and I hated it. You're actually coming? She asked, raising an eyebrow as I grabbed my jacket. I need to see it for myself, I muttered. Jessica grinned, grabbing her purse. You'll love it. I promise. I doubted that. The club wasn't what I expected. I thought it'd be some shady, low-lit place with velvet curtains and overpriced drinks. Instead, it was sleek, modern, practically looked like an upscale bar. People were laughing, mingling like it was just another Friday night out. But the way they touched each other, the way some couples disappeared behind closed doors, told me everything I needed to know. Jessica led me through the crowd, her hand resting lightly on my chest as she leaned in. See? Not so bad. I barely heard her. My eyes were locked on a man across the room. Tall, dark hair, sharp features. Way too familiar. Brian, Jessica's co-worker. He was leaning against the bar, a drink in hand, laughing with another couple. His eyes flicked to us, and for a split second his smile faded. Jessica's grip on my arm tightened slightly. I glanced down at her, heart pounding. You've been fucking Brian, haven't you? Jessica's lips curled into a wicked grin. I told you, she whispered. You should have come sooner. I could have knocked Brian's teeth out right there. Jessica must have felt the tension in my arm because she pulled me closer, pressing her body against mine like she was trying to distract me. Relax, Matt, she purred into my ear. You're embarrassing me. I didn't move. My eyes stayed locked on Brian as he watched from across the room, his smirk barely hidden behind the rim of his glass. This is who you've been fucking? I growled, keeping my voice low. Jessica ran her fingers down my arm, slow and deliberate. Among others. My blood boiled. I grabbed her wrist, pulling her away from the bar and into the corner near the hallway leading to the private rooms. You think this is a fucking joke? I hissed. Jessica laughed softly, tilting her head. Oh, don't act like this is some grand betrayal, Matt. We're in a swingers club, remember? I didn't agree to you sneaking around with your goddamn co-worker. She rolled her eyes. You agreed to an open marriage. Same thing. No, I snapped, leaning in closer. It's not. Jessica's eyes darkened, but she didn't back down. If you're that upset about it, she whispered, lips brushing against my ear, why don't you take me to one of the rooms and remind me who I belong to? I tightened my grip on her wrist, and for a brief moment, I considered it. I thought about dragging her into one of those rooms and fucking her so hard she'd forget every man she let touch her. But that wasn't enough. Jessica needed to feel what I was feeling. I let her go, stepping back. Enjoy your night, I said coldly, turning on my heel and walking toward the bar. Brian saw me coming. He straightened, but that smug grin didn't leave his face. Matt, he greeted, lifting his glass in mock salute. Didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, I muttered, grabbing a drink from the bar. I didn't expect to see my wife's side piece either. Brian chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Felix, man, it's just sex. The way he said it, casual, dismissive, made my fist itch. I leaned in, lowering my voice. Do you fuck her at work too? Or just here? Brian's smile faltered for the first time. I think you're misreading the situation, he said carefully. I smirked. Am I? I took a slow sip of my drink, keeping my eyes locked on him the entire time. Brian glanced past me, no doubt looking for Jessica. She's not going to save you, I muttered, setting my glass down with a loud clink. You've already crossed the line. Now it's my turn. He stiffened, but I walked away before he could respond. I wasn't going to fight him. Not here. I had something better in mind. Jessica found me outside, leaning against the hood of my car with a cigarette dangling between my fingers. I don't even smoke. She slid up next to me, running her fingers down my chest. Leaving already? I didn't look at her. I've seen enough. Jessica laughed softly. You're being dramatic. I finally glanced down at her, blowing a puff of smoke into the night air. You know, I said casually, Brian didn't look too comfortable when I mentioned fucking you at the office. Jessica's hand froze against my chest. I grinned. Guess he didn't realize you've been bragging about it. Her eyes narrowed. You didn't. I flicked the cigarette onto the ground, crushing it beneath my heel. Oh, I did, I replied smoothly. And something tells me he's going to be watching his back on Monday. Jessica's expression darkened. You're playing a dangerous game, Matt. I leaned in, brushing my lips against her ear. So are you. Jessica didn't say another word the entire drive home. She sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window like she wanted to shatter the glass with her bare hands. I could feel the heat radiating off her, but I didn't care. Let her stew. I wasn't done yet. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally broke the silence. You're such an asshole. I killed the engine, leaning back against the seat with a smirk. Takes one to know one. Jessica's nails dug into her palms. I told you this isn't cheating. You knew what this was. I turned to her, letting the calm mask slip just enough for her to see the fire behind my eyes. I knew about the club, Jess. I didn't know about Brian. Her lips curled into a tight, thin smile. So what? You want revenge? I leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. No, y whisperat. I want you to watch me burn everything down. Jessica's breath caught, but she masked it quickly, sliding out of the car and slamming the door behind her. I watched her storm inside, heels clicking against the pavement. She thought she could control this. She thought wrong. Monday morning, I made sure I was the one driving Jessica to work. She didn't argue. Maybe she thought I was letting it go. Maybe she thought I'd let the whole thing with Brian fade away. But the second we pulled into the lot, her shoulders stiffened. Brian was already there, standing by the entrance. His eyes flicked to the car, and even from a distance, I could see the way his jaw tightened. Jessica shifted uncomfortably beside me. You don't have to walk me in, she said quickly, reaching for the handle. I locked the doors. Oh no, I said smoothly, flashing her a cold grin. I insist. Her head snapped toward me. Matt! I unlocked the doors and stepped out, ignoring her protests as I rounded the car. Brian's gaze was locked onto me the entire time. Jessica caught up to me halfway to the door, grabbing my arm. Don't make a scene, she hissed. I glanced down at her. Who said anything about a scene? I shrugged her off and walked straight to Brian. Morning. I greeted, my voice light casual. Brian shifted uncomfortably, clearly trying to play it cool. Morning, Matt. Jessica hovered behind me, arms crossed like she was hoping to disappear into the pavement. I took my time, eyes scanning Brian from head to toe. Busy weekend? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Brian's eyes flicked nervously to Jessica, but I didn't let him answer. I'm sure it was, I continued, clapping him on the shoulder. Don't worry, Brian, I added in a lower tone, just loud enough for Jessica to hear. I'm not mad. After all, you're only fucking my wife, right? Brian paled. Jessica's entire body went rigid behind me. I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them standing in awkward silence as I headed for the car. By the time Jessica got back in, her face was flushed with fury. What the hell was that? She snapped. I grinned. That, Jess, was the opening act. She glared at me, breathing hard. You really want to go down this road? She asked through clenched teeth. I started the engine, eyes locked straight ahead. We're already on it. Jessica didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. Good. I wasn't in the mood to hear more of her bullshit excuses. I could feel her eyes burning into the back of my head as I sat on the couch, sipping a beer and flipping through channels like I didn't have a care in the world. She lingered near the doorway, arms crossed so tightly I thought she might snap in half. You're going to regret this, she muttered finally. I didn't look up. I already regret marrying you. Her lips tightened, but she didn't fire back. She knew better. The next day, things escalated. Brian must have felt the heat, because by lunchtime, he sent me a text. Brian, can we talk? I smiled, taking my time with the response. Me sure. Meet me at Joe's bar after work. Brian, I meant privately. Me. I bet you did. I left him on read after that. When I got to the bar, Brian was already there, nursing a drink like he wished it were something stronger. His leg bounced nervously under the table, eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. I slid into the seat across from him, waving down the bartender. Whiskey, I said casually. Brian rubbed his jaw, trying to hide the tension, nodding his shoulders. I get it, he started, leaning forward. You're pissed, but do we really need to keep doing this? I smirked, leaning back in my chair. Doing what? Talking? Brian exhaled sharply. Look, Matt, I didn't know she wasn't telling you everything. She said you were fine with it. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Did she tell you that before or after she let you fuck her in our bed? Brian's mouth opened, but no words came out. That's what I thought. You're a piece of shit, I continued, swirling the whiskey when it arrived. But hey, I can't blame you. Jessica spreads her legs for anyone with a pulse. Brian stiffened. I didn't come here to fight. I smiled. Neither did I. He watched me carefully, like he was waiting for the punchline. I came here to warn you, I added. Brian frowned. Warn me? I downed the rest of my drink, slamming the glass onto the table. You think I'm the problem, Brian? You have no idea who you're dealing with. His brow furrowed. Jessica's not loyal to anyone, I continued, standing slowly. Not me, and definitely not you. Brian's eyes narrowed, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. I tossed a few bills on the table and left him sitting there, confusion painted across his face. By the time I got home, Jessica was waiting in the kitchen, wine glass in hand. She leaned against the counter, watching me with those sharp eyes that used to make me weak in the knees. Not anymore. Brian called, she said, swirling the wine slowly. I smirked. I bet he did. She stepped closer, heels clicking against the floor. I don't know what you think you're doing, Matt, but you're wasting your time. I shrugged. Maybe. Jessica set the glass down, sliding her hands up my chest. You don't have to fight this, she whispered, pressing her body against mine. We can still fix things. I leaned down, brushing my lips against her ear. Oh, Jess, I whispered. I'm not trying to fix anything. Her breath hitched, just for a second. I pulled away, watching the flicker of doubt cross her face. She finally understood. I wasn't here to save our marriage. I was here to destroy hers. Jessica didn't sleep in our bed that night. I heard her pacing downstairs long after I turned out the lights, the faint clink of ice against glass telling me she was working through more wine than usual. Good. I wanted her restless. By the time morning rolled around, she was quiet. No snide remarks, no smug glances. She didn't even bring up Brian at breakfast. Just sat there, poking at her plate like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It wouldn't take long. I made sure of that. Brian's wife, Laura, wasn't hard to find. Social media made everything too easy. A few scrolls through his tag photos, and there she was smiling with their 2 kids at some Christmas event. Picture-perfect family. I almost felt bad. Almost. Laura's Instagram had a business email listed, some side hustle involving candles and homemade soaps. I fired off a message before I could second-guess it, attaching a few choice screenshots from Jessica's text with Brian. Subject: thought you should know. I kept it brief. Your husband's been fucking my wife. I've attached proof. Handle it how you want. I hit send and went about my day like nothing happened. Jessica's phone started blowing up that afternoon. We were sitting in the living room when she glanced at the screen and immediately stiffened. "Who's that?" I asked, not bothering to look up from the TV. "No one," she muttered, standing quickly and disappearing into the kitchen. I heard the door to the backyard slide open. Jessica's voice was low, but not low enough. "Brian, what the hell is going on?" "No, she emailed me." Laura saw everything. I smiled to myself, stretching out on the couch. Jessica stormed back inside 10 minutes later, her face flushed with rage. "You did this," she hissed, pointing at me. "If I ignore innocence, glancing over it." "Did what?" "Don't play dumb, Matt." She threw her phone onto the table. The screen still lit up with Brian's missed calls. "Laura found out. You sent her those messages." I took a long sip of my beer, meeting her glare head-on. "Yeah," I said calmly. "I did." Jessica stared at me, mouth slightly open, like she couldn't believe I'd actually gone through with it. "You've ruined his life," she snapped. I laughed, leaning forward. "His life? You mean the guy you've been fucking behind my back for half a year?" Jessica crossed her arms tightly, but I could see the cracks forming. "He's getting divorced," she said flatly. "Laura's kicking him out." "Good," I replied, setting the beer down. "He can crash at one of those swinger parties you love so much." Jessica stepped closer, hands trembling. "You don't get it. You just nuked everything." I stood slowly, letting the tension hang between us. "No, Jess," I said, lowering my voice. "I fixed everything." She opened her mouth to fire back, but the sound of her phone buzzing again cut her off. "Brian." Jessica stared at the screen, hesitating. "You should probably answer that," I said casually, brushing past her on my way to the stairs. She didn't move. By the time I reached the top, she was still standing there, staring at the phone like it might catch fire in her hands. That night, I slept like a baby. Jessica didn't come to bed. The next morning, Jessica was gone. I found her car missing from the driveway when I got up, but I didn't bother calling. I already knew where she was, probably parked outside Brian's house, trying to piece together the scraps of their little affair. Let her. I had time. By noon, I got a text. "Jessica, we need to talk." I left it on read. She could wait. When she finally dragged herself home that evening, she looked like hell. Hair a mess, eyes puffy and red. "Rough day?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter as she walked in. Jessica tossed her purse onto the table, glaring at me. "Laura threw him out." I smirked. "I know." Her nostrils flared. "You don't feel even a little bad about this?" "Not even a little," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of my drink. Jessica ran her hands through her hair, pacing like she needed to burn off the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "He's staying at a hotel," she muttered, almost like she was talking to herself. I raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be my problem?" Jessica's eyes snapped to mine. "It is when you caused it." I laughed. "You're unbelievable, Jess. I didn't cause this, you did. You just didn't think you'd get caught." She glared at me, but the fight was draining out of her. "I'm not apologizing," I added, stepping closer. "You wanted to play this game. Now you live with the fallout." Jessica crossed her arms tightly, staring at the floor. "Brian's talking about quitting," she said quietly. "He can't handle seeing me at work every day." I shrugged. "Guess you'll have to find a new fuck buddy." Her head snapped up, and for a second I thought she might actually hit me. But instead, she just laughed bitterly. You really hate me, don't you? She asked, voice sharp. I stepped right into her space, leaning down until we were eye level. No, y whispered. I'm disappointed in you. That's worse. Jessica blinked, caught off guard, but I didn't stick around to watch her unravel. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me. I didn't answer. Let her wonder. By the time I got back that night, Jessica was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. She looked smaller somehow, like all the confidence had finally been squeezed out of her. She didn't say anything as I walked past, but as I climbed the stairs, I heard her voice, soft, almost hesitant. Are you leaving me? I stopped, one hand gripping the banister. I haven't decided yet, I replied without turning around. I let her sit with that uncertainty. She deserved it. The house was quiet for the next few days. Jessica didn't try to argue, didn't snap back like she usually would. She just hovered, silent and uneasy, like she was waiting for the hammer to finally drop. I liked it. I let her sit in that discomfort. I made sure to stay late at work, kept my phone face down on the counter whenever I was home. I wanted her paranoid. I wanted her to feel exactly what I'd felt, like the ground could crumble at any second. By Thursday, she finally cracked. I came home late, dropping my keys onto the table when I noticed Jessica sitting at the kitchen island. She had 2 glasses of whiskey poured, one already half empty. She watched me carefully, her fingers tracing slow circles along the rim of the glass. Have a drink with me, she said softly. I almost laughed. Trying to seduce your way out of this, Jess? I asked, hanging my jacket on the chair. She shook her head. No. Her voice was quieter than I expected. I sat down across from her, picking up the glass but not drinking yet. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. I fucked up, she admitted, surprising me. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, nosti. She exhaled shakily, staring down into her drink. I never thought it'd get this far, she continued, her voice low. The club, the open thing, I thought it was harmless. But I got greedy. I finished for her. She flinched but nodded. Brian was just easy, she whispered. I clenched the glass a little tighter. I bet he was, I said coldly. Jessica looked up, and for the first time, I saw something genuine in her expression, fear. Is there any way to fix this? She asked, almost desperate. I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. That depends. On what? She asked carefully. I set the glass down with a soft thud. On whether or not you're ready to lose him and your job. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? She asked slowly. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling casually until I found what I was looking for. Brian's wife sent me something interesting, I said, sliding the phone across the table. Jessica's eyes flicked down, widening as she stared at the screen. It was a company email, one that mentioned inappropriate conduct and ongoing investigation. You forwarded the text to HR? She whispered, color draining from her face. I grinned. Oh, Jess, I didn't just send them the texts. I tapped the phone, bringing up a folder full of photos. Ones Jessica thought she deleted. Shots of her and Brian at the club, kissing in parking lots, sneaking off during office parties. I made sure they got the full picture, I said smoothly. Jessica's hands trembled as she set the phone down. They'll fire him, she muttered. I nodded. Yeah, and you'll probably get dragged through the mud too. Her eyes darted up to meet mine, panic bubbling just beneath the surface. Why? She choked out. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. Because you thought you could fuck around and walk away clean. Jessica's lip trembled, but she said nothing. I watched her break, piece by piece, and I didn't feel a damn thing. She wasn't sorry. She was caught. Jessica didn't touch her drink after that. She sat there, staring at the phone like it might catch fire, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the counter. Matt, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I held up a hand. Don't. Her mouth snapped shut. She thought this was the part where I softened, where I'd sweep the phone off the table, tell her I'd delete everything, and maybe we could try therapy or some other bullshit. Not this time. I stood up, grabbing the phone as I passed by her. You should probably start looking for another job, I said casually, scrolling through emails like I wasn't dismantling her life. Jessica's eyes followed me, but she didn't move. Matt, if I lose my job, she stopped in the end of the sentence. You'll what? I cut her off, tilting my head. Sleep your way to the top somewhere else. Jessica's face twisted into something ugly. Embarrassment, maybe even shame, but she hid it quickly. I walked out of the kitchen before she could answer. By the next day, Brian's desk was empty. Word spread fast. HR didn't keep secrets well, and apparently neither did Laura. She showed up at the office during lunch, screaming loud enough that half the building heard it. Jessica tried to play it cool when she got home. She threw her bag on the table like nothing had happened, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I didn't say a word. I wanted to watch her squirm. It wasn't until Saturday night that she broke again. I was sitting in the garage, working on my bike, when she appeared in the doorway. She wasn't wearing the smug smile I was used to. Instead, she lingered in the shadows, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I didn't look up. "About what?" Jessica shifted on her feet. "You know what?" I tightened a bolt, letting the silence stretch. "You've made your point, Matt," she continued, stepping closer. "Brian's gone. Laura's divorcing him. And I'm probably next." I wiped my hands on a rag, finally meeting her gaze. "Good." Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's all you have to say?" I stood slowly, crossing the garage until we were inches apart. "You didn't care when it was me," I said coldly. "Why should I care now?" Her breath hitched, but I saw the flicker of anger return. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she snapped, stepping closer like she could intimidate me. I laughed, leaning down until we were eye to eye. "Watching you fall apart?" I whispered. "Absolutely." Jessica's hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't argue. She just turned and walked back into the house without another word. I watched her go, feeling nothing but satisfaction. By Monday morning, Jessica's name was the only one floating around the office. Apparently, HR wasn't done yet. I left for work early, watching from the window as Jessica sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop. She wasn't typing, just sitting there, waiting for the inevitable. It was coming, and when it hit, I'd be right there to watch her crumble. Jessica was fired by noon. I got the text while sitting at my desk. Just 2 words, "It's over." I stared at it for a long time, letting the weight of it settle. Not because I felt bad. There wasn't a shred of pity left for her. But I knew she'd be home when I got back, and I wanted to savor the moment. When I walked through the door that evening, she was exactly where I expected, sitting on the couch, an untouched glass of wine on the table in front of her. Jessica didn't look up when I entered. "Rough day?" I asked, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. She exhaled sharply, but said nothing. I walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a drink and leaning against the counter as I watched her through the doorway. "You wanted this, remember?" I said, swirling the glass in my hand. Jessica's head lifted slowly, eyes locking onto mine. They weren't defiant anymore. They were hollow. "Is this enough for you?" she asked softly. I smiled faintly. "Not yet." Her gaze hardened, but she didn't push it. She knew better. I stepped closer, crossing into the living room. "You thought you'd get away with it," I continued. "Thought you'd keep Brian on the side, play house with me, and pretend it was all just fun and games." Jessica's jaw clenched, but she stayed silent. "But you didn't," I said, lowering my voice as I leaned over the back of the couch. "And now you don't have him. You don't have your job. You barely have this." Her eyes flicked around the room, our room, but she didn't argue. "Maybe I deserve it," she muttered. I smirked. "You definitely do." Jessica sank lower into the couch, gripping the blanket in her lap like it might shield her from the reality she'd created. But there was no escaping this. A week passed, and Jessica barely left the house. I watched her spiral, drinking more than usual, staying in bed long after I left for work. She tried to keep up appearances when Ethan was home, but even he started to notice the cracks. "Is Mom okay?" he asked one night while we ate dinner. "She's just tired," I replied. Ethan didn't look convinced. Neither was I. By the second week, I came home to find Jessica standing in the garage, a half-packed suitcase beside her. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "Going somewhere?" She hesitated, brushing hair behind her ear nervously. "Megan offered me her guest room for a while." I nodded slowly, stepping further into the garage. Jessica shifted under my gaze, tugging at the sleeve of her sweater. I think we need space. I laughed softly. Now you want space? Her eyes flashed with irritation, but she swallowed it down. I can't stay here, Matt, she said quietly. I circled her slowly, stopping just behind her shoulder. That's probably for the best, I whispered. Jessica shivered, but not from the cold. She picked up the suitcase, rolling it toward the car. Ethan's staying with me, I added firmly. Her grip tightened around the handle, but she didn't fight it. I know, she muttered. Jessica opened the trunk, shoving the suitcase inside before pausing for a long moment. When she finally turned to face me, her eyes were glassy, but the anger had faded. I'm sorry, she whispered. I stared at her, letting the words hang between us. Then I smiled coldly. Too late. Jessica's face crumbled, but I didn't care. She climbed into the car without another word, and I watched as she drove away, slowly, like she was hoping I'd stop her. I didn't. I never would. Jessica didn't come back. Not for a long time. She texted a few times, mostly about Ethan, asking when she could see him if she could take him for a weekend. I let her have the bare minimum. A Saturday here, a few hours there. But there were no family dinners, no late-night talks, and definitely no coming home. She knew better than to ask. Ethan adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are resilient like that. He didn't ask too many questions. Just rolled with it, happy enough as long as I showed up for him. And I always did. Jessica tried harder with him, showing up to soccer games, buying him little gifts to make up for her absence. But I could see it in Ethan's eyes. She was just a visitor now. One night, maybe 3 months later, I ran into Megan at the grocery store. She spotted me near the produce section, waving me down like she'd been waiting for it. Matt, she greeted, grabbing a few apples and tossing them into her cart. Been a while. I smiled faintly, nodding. Yeah, it has. Megan leaned on the cart, eyeing me carefully. Jessica's been quiet lately. I raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be my problem? Megan smirked. I'm just saying, she's been keeping to herself. I think she's finally getting it. Getting what? I asked. That she fucked up. Megan replied casually, grabbing a bag of oranges. I chuckled. Took her long enough. Megan glanced at me, something unreadable flickering across her face. You really aren't going to take her back, huh? I paused, meeting her gaze. No, I said firmly. I'm not. Megan nodded, like she'd expected that. She's lucky you let her see Ethan at all, she added, her voice softer now. I shrugged. I'm not doing it for her. Megan smiled knowingly. Yeah, I figured. Jessica kept her distance after that. I let her see Ethan, but I made damn sure she knew the boundaries. She didn't cross them. Not again. Her life unraveled quietly. She picked up a job at some local diner, waiting tables like she hadn't been managing accounts 6 months ago. Every now and then, I heard whispers about her through mutual friends. How she'd stopped showing up to the swinger parties, how Brian had moved to another state to start over. Jessica stayed, but she never quite rebuilt what she'd lost. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, I found myself sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars. Jessica had called earlier, asking if she could take Ethan to dinner the next day. I'd said yes. I didn't hate her anymore, but I didn't love her either. I sipped my drink, listening to the crickets hum in the distance. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won.